Welcome everyone to today's webinar, This Way Home, Top 10 Predictions for Care at Home in 2025. My name is Riley Wilson, writer for Becker's Healthcare. On behalf of all of us, thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I'll walk us through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. If at any time you don't see your slides moving or have trouble with the audio, try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions to the Q&A box. We are here to help. With that, I am pleased to introduce today's speakers. Dr. Stephen Dorner, Chief Clinical and Innovation Officer for Healthcare at Home at Mass General Brigham, Dr. Sanju Pandit, Senior Medical Director at Best Buy Health, and Michael Capriotti, President of Advanced Care Operations and Logistics at Virtua Health. Dr. Dorner, Dr. Pandit, and Michael, thank you for being here today. I'll now turn the floor over to you to begin today's discussion.
Thank you so much, and thank you all of us joining us today. Really excited about getting into this discussion about our top 10 predictions for care at home this year. As mentioned, we'll have a conversation here that I hope keeps everyone on their toes a little bit, and then we'll have time at the end for some questions from the audience. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We have our first prediction here. Collective understanding of value of hospital at home will evolve. Stephen, maybe I can start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing at the top for everybody on the call is thinking about the status of the hospital at home waiver and what's going to happen with the 90-day extension that we have through March. I think that, prefacing the whole rest of this discussion over the next hour is that Congress is going to recognize the value of hospital at home and authorize its extension with the waiver, really differentiate what hospital at home affords that is different from telehealth. Really, when we're talking about acuity of care and the level of support that we're able to deliver in patients' homes, telehealth is a critical enabling tool for hospital at home, but really very different when we're talking about the breadth of services that come through hospital at home delivery. And then all the associated outcome differentiators, the cost differentiators, patient experience, et cetera. And so I think that's just one of the key things to start out with at the start of the call.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, we have bipartisan support. This is a budget neutral waiver. And I think that, hospital at home is proving to be a huge value to our patients, to our physicians, our nurses, and really look at, hospital at home as being one component of a true care at home strategy as we think about care at home and healthcare.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think a couple of those points will come out in our other predictions, but I think a large part of that is this is happening. It's a new model, and so we're all learning as we go. And I think it's important that we keep innovation in balance with safety and patient outcomes. So yeah, great points there. We can go into our second prediction here. Hospital at home will continue to be a cornerstone to care at home. But for organizations to succeed, they'll need to diversify their programs. Michael, you started to touch on this with your comment on our prediction. Can we go a little bit deeper into this area?
Sure. As we're out there meeting with other organizations who have hospital at home programs or starting hospital at home programs, many organizations solely focus on hospital at home. And we know that hospital at home is a fairly significant investment for organizations as you think about the foundational work that you need to put in place, from remote patient monitoring to 24/7 nursing command centers. And we've taken the stance here at Virtua that hospital at home is a component of our care at home strategy. We believe and are committed that anywhere from 10 to 25% of all care in our community will move into the home in the next 10 years. And hospital at home is just one component of that. If you focus solely on hospital at home, it can sometimes hinder that conversation with the executive suite on what truly is the value of a program. Sure, we're seeing patient satisfaction, amazing quality results in our program, but it has also sparked other levels of care that we're starting to build out in our ambulatory settings as we think about the robust opportunity that we can have in caring for people in their home with the changes in technology, with the infrastructure that we've built. We've built out care after discharge programs. We're starting to look at home infusion, integrating with our home health program, and really creating a seamless, integrated program. Now, as you talk about hospital at home becomes more of an innovation center that helps you really build out a true care at home strategy to better serve the community as we think about where care is going in the future.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of things, and you touched on a lot of components that kind of support that move to a larger care at home model. Stephen, are you kind of seeing the same thing? And what are your thoughts on the larger prediction here in terms of diversifying to this broader based approach to this area?
I completely agree with Michael. I think it's an important thing to consider that most clinicians did not train in an environment that the home is where you deliver a lot of acute care. And so folks often conflate what is home health, what is hospital at home, what is home infusion. And so as we try to think about the home as a solution, as a site of care for the broad swath of different conditions and levels of acuity that we can support, and the idea of truly building out that home-based care continuum, you have to really meet people where they are. And if you want them to think about the home as an option for those different levels of acuity and those different types of needs, you have to diversify your offerings and what you can provide to them, or else you're going to be ending up delivering a very small sliver of solutions for them, and that's not going to end up meeting their needs.
I agree with this a lot because I'm a PM&R doc, so I think about this pretty regularly with my patients because it's not, they're not their diseases. They live their lives and they want to live well. And so considering how can we empower them to do that in their own environment. And I think that encompasses a lot of the points you both have brought up. And it's really pushing the envelope a little bit and thinking about how we deliver that whole person care as it's known, but really across the continuum and not staying within these buckets of care that we've determined to be the end all be all with these false barriers. And they've evolved with time and we've all trained in those environments, but now it's really thinking about a new model to support kind of where we are because the technology is there to do just that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the trends in the country of aging in place and our aging population, the technology has really enabled us to really look at these programs as scalable. Programs in the home failed when they first started, the doctor coming to your house with their call bag, because scalability was very difficult. So we moved healthcare into our setting and said, you need to come to us. But now the way the technology's evolved, it has us thinking of this whole new avenue, and people are really starting to realize I can possibly age in place, and my difficulty getting to that appointment may not be a barrier to me managing my healthcare. It's a huge piece of it.
Yeah, fantastic. And actually, I think that very nice segue here into our third prediction. As organizations diversify, they'll shift away from direct reimbursement models and focus on cost-benefit analysis to demonstrate value. And I think that I love the word value here because I think that is just so critical as we're thinking about exploring these new ways of delivering care. So Stephen, I'll come to you with this prediction and get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a perfect segue from the previous prediction. As we talk about these different types of needs and the different ways we can care for patients at home, we're really talking about that connective tissue between traditional encounters and their associated reimbursement structure. And we're not going to have a perfect square peg to square hole, round peg to round hole situation. And so hospitals and health systems are going to have to look at the global value perspective of what is delivered by or what is afforded by delivering this care in the home, whether that's the vacating of the bed in the hospital so that a higher acuity patient can backfill it, whether that is the direct revenue opportunity of an inpatient episode at home, whether that's the quality benefit that's associated from minimizing risks for patients in a bundled payment model. It really just depends. And so it's not going to fit into the traditional P&L structure the way that so many hospitals and systems have come to have to think about care. It's really going to force an evolution in the way that we account for structuring the way we deliver these episodes and how we assess their benefits.
One thing you put out there is engaging the financial team
Totally.
in that conversation.
Yeah.
So Michael, I think you might have been headed in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, when I've talked to organizations across the country, I can't tell you how many get stuck and ask me, well, how did you justify the P&L? And if you go at this in a traditional P&L setting, it's going to be, especially out of the gates, as you're making such a large investment to get your program up and running, and typically you'll have smaller volumes when you first start. The traditional P&L is very difficult and challenging. It's very important to get out in front of the executives and your finance team and really agree on what other variables that may be below the line of a traditional P&L, such as readmission rates. We know that we're not going to get reimbursed for readmission. So if we can reduce readmission rates, reducing length of stay, backfilling beds, which is like kind of the, are you really, I mean, that was a huge challenge at Virtua, like you're not going to backfill beds, and we've backfilled every bed. So, really holding yourselves to certainly looking at cost management and the expense of it, but working with the executives to create a dashboard around what are the other value adds and true financial that may not be in your cost center, but the organization is benefiting from, so that you can get credit for that and really look at how the total impacts your organization versus what a traditional expense P&L may look like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Speaking as an ER doc, on any given day, the number of boarders that we have lining our hallways in emergency departments, we're capturing revenue for those patients, but we're delivering care in actual hallways. Being able to say to our patients, we have built up a strategy that ensures that you are not going to get care in a hallway when you're meeting inpatient care. That's a huge thing to be able to share to your patients, and the value that they will take home, knowing that their loved ones are being cared for in that way as well. It's not going to reflect in a P&L.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you brought in another stakeholder group, which is the caregivers. And,
Right.
It's thinking beyond just that moment, as you both have eloquently described, but it's also thinking broadly about how does this affect kind of the ripple effect, if you will, in that person's life, as well as on the clinical teams, frankly, because the clinical teams are bridging these gaps in real time, and that's not captured as well in traditional settings, if you want to call it that. All right, so let's go into this fourth one. And again, I feel like we've done a really nice job here, like putting them all in as a puzzle piece. So our prediction number 4 is Care at Home program maturity will be measured by how deeply ingrained it is in the culture of the organization. And both of y'all are chuckling because, we just touched on this. And I think it's really important and sometimes understated on how, we do things the way we've done them, because that's our muscle memory on how we get things done. But how do we shift culture? How do we shift expectation? And maybe, Michael, you can start the conversation on this one.
Yeah, a true mature care at home or hospital at home or care at home strategy really is woven into the fabric of the organization's vernacular. Really getting from essentially like our program has been very much of what I would call a pull program, where we have clinicians screening for patients, and we're approaching physicians to say, hey, I think this is a good hospital at home patient. what do you think, to we need physicians to start to say at assessment and in our EDs at the time of coming in our doors, this might be a really good patient for a hospital at home, and starting those conversations earlier. We also have to start to embed those conversations in our multidisciplinary rounds. Hospital at home, our care after discharge program, we're working to ingrain that in the vernacular so that in conversations about our patient's care journey at multidisciplinary rounds, they're talking about these programs like they would talk about home health, like they would talk about a skilled nursing transition. Like, this is not an outside program. This is a new way we deliver care, and it has to be looked at in those same ways and talked about from the time the patient comes in our doors, and hopefully someday even before they get in our doors. That's a big piece of getting to maturity, and it's the way that we're going to embed these programs in how we deliver care into the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a key way of how I've been trying to get my colleagues within the emergency department to reframe the way we even talk about the need for inpatient care, where we say right up front, you need a period of stabilization, but I want to get you home as soon as I possibly can, even if that means you're going to continue needing IV antibiotics, and we deliver that at home. I think another great thing that we've seen is the rise of post-operative recovery in the home, and getting individual surgeons to start to get that positive feedback loop of having had their own patients recover in that space, and then saying, these are the other patients that would benefit from that. And then you have other surgeons who start to say, well, if their patients are benefiting, I want my patients to benefit from that too. And that's really when you start to see the wheels of culture change churn, and it begins to scale.
I think, one thing you both pointed out is the number of questions that come up in shifting this culture, and this ability to say, okay, how do we navigate that challenge or that gap and still get that patient home, so that we could support this larger move to a care delivery in the home as an organization, and not let that be the reason we revert back to traditional admit them to the med-surg unit or whatnot. It takes a lot of out of the box thinking and some innovative design. But I do think now, we've learned over these last several years that there's a lot of new services that can support that larger delivery in the home. You mentioned IV antibiotics, but we can also think about, is there a dietary need that's usually met in the hospital that can't be met in the home? Now, how do we think about meeting that need in the home versus that being a burden to getting that person in the home to recover from whatever infectious cause is causing them to need admission to begin with? So I think it's allowing that conversation to occur versus it being just a natural, okay, we'll just move them to the floor. And that's a culture shift in and of itself, is allowing those questions and that conversation to occur.
Yeah, I would really agree. And to Stephen's point about conversations with the physicians, if it's not ingrained in your culture, your physician's not going to have an open conversation with their patient about these new options for care. And the patient's just not going to trust that as a new avenue of care. Well, that's what we find. The program has to be introduced and discussed at a very early level. So we have to engage our hospital physicians, our hospitalists, our ED physicians, and even our nursing staffs to be comfortable talking about this and answering questions as patients, because the patients, their family members, they're going to ask. And if we approach them on these programs and they say, my physician or my nurse never talked about that, the first thing they're going to do is go, I don't think I want to do this. So it has to be a care team model. It has to be a team approach. And it has to, getting it embedded in that culture is so crucial.
Actually, you mentioned the word trust. And to me, that takes all of us, right? Like, and there's a transparency that has to be innate to building that trust as well. And that leads us into our fifth prediction. So lines will blur between virtual care and brick and mortar facilities and care at home programs. We saw this happen, I don't know, now like 15 years ago with banking. online and in person. Now it's just all banking, as we all heard that analogy used several times over during the height of the pandemic. Michael, maybe you can lean in that same thought that you were mentioning in our previous prediction. What are your thoughts with this?
Yeah, sure. We at Virtual approached hospital at home as an innovation model. And that's how we talked about it with our executives. And we said, let us do this, let us spend X amount of dollars and let us learn from it. Let us see where else it could take us. And when our organization and our clinicians and our physician leadership saw that we could do true acute care in the home, it made us take a step back and say, imagine what else we can do in our own bricks and mortar facilities if we can do this virtual care in such a sophisticated way in people's homes. So we've now started to look at virtual care completely throughout our organization in looking at virtual hospitalists, virtual nursing. We're now cameraing every med surg and ICU bed in our organization. And I don't know that our organization would have adopted it as quickly had we not been so successful in our care at home strategy in proving that virtual care can be effective and provide high quality, engaging care. So what I think with that, as I see this all evolving and as these roles are evolving, we talked about some physicians or clinicians not being comfortable to do virtual care and others learning to do it. It's going to become a skill set that we have in our organizations that can truly start to blur the lines between what my care looks like in the bricks and mortar facility to how my care feels and looks in my home. And I think it's been a great thing for us, and it could be a great thing for organizations across the country as we think about clinician shortages, the Great Resignation, all of the surges that are coming from our boomer populations aging, and all the surges we're all seeing in our facilities. None of that's going to get any better. And now this seems like a light at the end of that tunnel for us to rethink how we approach that and how we deliver care and how we integrate those two care models together in a seamless way.
I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is that the facility won't be the center of care anymore, that it's really going to be more about putting the patient at the center of care. And that means that for certain things, they're going to go to facilities because that's where it's available, but then it'll default to what's most convenient for them. When it's transferable between a facility-based option or a home-based option. And for those for whom the home is a healing place, then being home is something that they're going to take advantage of. And that's not going to be for everybody. And that's where hospitals and facilities will be able to be that equalizer in a lot of ways for standardizing what's available to patients.
Yeah, and I think one thing that has happened is organizations such as both of yours and others are sharing their experiences in the space, both successes, but also, areas of opportunity. And I think having that open dialogue of what's working and maybe what needs to be revisited is also allowing this to happen in kind of this. It's happening in real time, of course, but certainly having this evolution take place in a measured way so that we always maintain that North Star of patient outcomes and patient safety. So that blurring becomes, again, rooted in that trust. That word trust, it's something we're all, it's something that's palpable to us because we see our patients and we never want to be frivolous with sort of our approach in this way. So as it becomes more and more commonplace, I think we'll continue to just improve how we deliver the care. And then maybe, Michael, to your earlier point, we start with the word home or care in the home, or start with the phrase care in the home, and then see if facility care is needed. But maybe that's next year's prediction, maybe not this year. Yeah. We're at the midpoint here. We'll get into our sixth prediction here. And this one's a little bit near and dear to my heart. We'll see a technology progression within fall management that shifts its focus from detection to prevention. And again, this is really, really an important piece because whether you're in facility or in home, falls are something that we all want to avoid. whether it's with regards to acute care or even just, chronic care or, living well. So I think this idea of getting ahead of that conversation, I know I took a call not that long ago, and hearing that bed alarm go off is one of the worst signs, is one of those worst sounds that you feel, because you're like, oh, you certainly don't want to think that anyone has gotten hurt. So how do we kind of go upstream with that? How do we start thinking proactively about signs and get ahead of that conversation? Some of the conversations that, around delirium management and things like that have been there for a long time, but also beyond that, how do we think about different, perhaps flooring material that prevents different, it changes the resistance or the impact if a fall should occur, or thinking differently about caregiver support and caregiver education and things like that, or maybe even ambient sensors leading in and saying, did you need something? And being able to be more soft versus a loud alarm going off when a person moves in bed. So that's kind of some of the things that I think about. Thoughts from you both?
Go ahead, Michael.
It was like you were ready
to
jump in. So
no, it's okay. Absolutely. I mean, I agree, and I think the neat thing is that we're seeing companies start to develop technologies because this space is growing so well. That, I think being able to be more predictive, to be more supportive in the home where care support is needed and where care support isn't, I think is definitely a growing trend, and technology is absolutely a huge part of that. Ambient sensors, that's a component of what we're going to be doing in our med surge units when we look at fall risk projection and avoidance. And we've been talking to companies about how we do that in home, and how we can really be more supportive in the home in reducing fall risks and things like that. Stephen, I kind of talked over you, so your thoughts?
No, you're good. I agree with all that. I think the other thing too is that, and as I'm seeing questions pop into the Q&A around, how are providers feeling about this? How are you accounting for folks who live alone? I mean, many programs are deploying home health aides into care alongside patients who live alone, so that they can still comfortably recover at home. I think on the provider side, we do a lot of things to try to treat providers under the auspice that it's treating patients, and we're collecting additional data because it makes the providers feel better about things, including in the home. And I think that can benefit us in a lot of ways in this point in particular, in that all those added data points that we are now collecting during home-based care delivery exceed even the data points that we would otherwise collect on patients if they were in our traditional brick and mortar hospitals. And so being able to take that data and all that information and turn it into more of a proactive way of anticipating care needs and what patients are going to need, including potential for falls, that's one of the great promises of all of the new data that we're collecting in the home-based space, to be able to shift away from being that reactive care model to being that more proactive and predictive care model.
That. I mean, again, a lot of these things is how do we get ahead of some of these maybe not all are avoidable, but there's several of these instances that are, and how do we start to think about data being one of those tools in our box, to move into early prevention and bolster prevention in general. So moving in to our next prediction, distinctions will fade between consumer wearables and remote patient monitoring technology. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this now. Just when you go to any retail, any consumer electronics store, you see a number of options in this space. And frankly, the culture has shifted too, where people are interested in getting their own data about their health, and whether it's wellness or, even management at home for different disease states. And people are just more in tune with asking those questions based on the data that they're seeing, whether it's a watch or other tool. So I think the word consumer versus otherwise is really more semantics at sometimes, because I know in my clinic I've had people show up with information that wasn't within something that we collected, and I was going to respond to some of the trends that they brought forward. And I think and that's great. I mean, I love seeing kind of that shift in interest, and also wanting that data, but also being able to interpret the data. So I'd love to hear from both of you, especially as we're moving care into the home with some of these models. How are you thinking about kind of the number of tools out there now that are both in this entire spectrum, consumer to otherwise?
I think we have to evolve it to think about the ecosystem of different devices and data points that they're collecting, and how you can look at them as modular tools to be able to inform and guide the care delivery. There is not an ER doctor out there who hasn't had a patient show up who says, oh, my Fitbit told me this, or my Apple Watch told me that, and want you to interpret what it might be, even if they don't even know how to pull up whatever it was that their watch told them. I think we're going to see a lot more of that going forward. Folks don't realize how much their iPhones are collecting about the time that their feet are in contact with the floor when they're walking, and what the distance is in their gait, and those kinds of things. And so why can't we incorporate that into the ecosystem of information as we try to predict falls? Why can't we account for the information that we get in terms of the number of times your Oura Ring detected disturbances in your breathing patterns during sleep? I think we're going to be able to have more interoperability and access to all of that information, and it's going to inform better care as a result.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's changed in the way we think we engage with our patients out in the ambulatory setting. I think prior to us doing care in a home, there was this huge fear of too much data and what are we going to do with it. And then we started doing continuous monitoring on patients, and they're like, oh my gosh, look at all the things I'm learning. So we're learning how to digest that data, what things we can do with it, when it's necessary, when it's not necessary. And I think this wearable trend and remote patient monitoring trend is just going to continue to get more sophisticated. And I'm hoping in parallel, we're getting more comfortable as a healthcare system in how we're going to digest it, absorb it, and support our patients out in the community. We've talked about the importance of potentially evolving into leave behind devices in certain situations, or bring your own devices. There's certainly some industry things that have to happen around FDA classification and things like that have to get more sophisticated. But I do think, maybe not 2025, but as we evolve into future years, I could see a time where, that those conversations that Stephen talked about are, maybe we're reaching out and having those conversations because we notice their Fitbit or their Oura Ring is indicating sleep apnea or something that has been undiagnosed, and we're preemptively getting to those patients to help support them. And I think it's going to create a completely different relationship between your primary care providers and your health system, and how you look at your health in your home. I think we're really starting to blur those gaps.
Yeah, I think both of you talked about interoperability and data integration, and then surfacing up signal versus noise. And I think that's something that comes up to all of us. I mean, it's both of you talked about, it's really not the device itself, it's about the information you're gathering from it. And so that interpretation is going to continue to be something that we get better at, I think, over time, as we start to synthesize all of these different data streams and figure out what to respond to, and frankly also empower patients to understand that as well, and give that literacy, kind of that as a portion of the care that we're delivering. Let them also learn, as we're learning too, how to interpret, the amount of data that's coming towards us. But I agree. I mean, it's not, I think I'm starting to hear that shift from so much data to how do we take that data and get information out of it, which is, I mean, it's a terrific shift in conversation. All right. We're getting on the last edge of this. Let's get into our 8th prediction. We're going to see new entrants, both in terms of hospitals and vendors. So we talked about the ecosystem of devices, ecosystem in terms of delivering care in the home. Now let's kind of get on the other side of this. What are your thoughts about new entrants as a space, kind of on the delivery side?
I think we're going to see that more and more hospitals and health systems continue to launch into this space and explore how to deliver care in this way. I personally hear from leaders at different hospitals and health systems every single week about, we're thinking about this. Can you tell us how to do that? And that's a conversation that's just going to continue to evolve, and more folks are going to get engaged. I think we're also going to see that there's more and more partnerships that develop as a result of that, because not everyone wants to reinvent the wheel, nor should they reinvent the wheel. And so how can we leverage each other's strengths to be able to deliver better care for more patients? And then on the tech side and solutioning, there are comments in the chat and questions around, I'm worried about all this data. What are we going to do with all this data? Providers are worried about all of the data. Well, I think you're going to start to see that there's a lot more folks who are coming in who are interested in just synthesizing the data. And how do you turn data points into actionable information for providers so that you're not just the one sifting through data points endlessly, which would be completely impossible. You're going to see more portability in technology. You're going to see more connectivity solutions. The fact that the 200 plus of us are sitting on this call today engaged in this is just the tip of the iceberg of how many people are thinking about this day in and day out and trying to make this space better.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. And it's actually nice to see how much it's evolved over the few short years. This has been such a huge, focus with the opening of the different waivers in our government, and seeing how there are vendors and other organizations agreeing to partner around areas that were just not even talked about prior to this. Logistics, delivering care in the home, from delivering of meds to RPM systems, to continuous monitoring, to delivering food to the home, and all of those pieces that I think you're going to continue to see that grow. And I agree that you're going to see more partnerships and more sophistication across different vendors as we look at this. And I think the data conversation is really interesting, and looking at, again, that shift of getting comfortable with, oh, wow, this data can be useful, but it has to be synthesized for me. And how are we going to do that? Is also a very interesting conversation that's starting to come out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all seen that we at hospital systems and other provider organizations don't have to do it all. There are others with core competencies that can really nicely complement the core competencies of the provider organizations and others in the ecosystem of healthcare. And I think that word partnership to me is so powerful, because it allows us to go faster and to go much more in a nimble, more informed direction, or getting to kind of some of these audacious goals that we have out there. So yeah, no, I love the conversation, and I want to see who else enters this space, and not entry for the sake of entry's sake, but in the sense of bringing expertise to the conversation so that we can uplift the work that is already being done. All right. Our 9th prediction, it's hard to believe we've already gone through 8 here, but AI, we haven't said that yet, have we? AI is going to be layered on top of in-home data to make it more proactive and predictive. So yeah, let's start the conversation on AI. I mean, I can't believe we went through almost 40 minutes without saying
I
AI.
was trying to avoid saying it.
And Michael, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I mean, AI is such a hot topic. I mean, you can't go to a tech conference. I think every company's added AI to the end of their name. But all joking aside, AI can be a powerful tool. I see in the chat some folks talking about, the tsunami of home health data and what are we going to do with that. A lot of the technology that's out there helps you sort through that and creates alerts and acknowledgement that kind of helps you from that perspective, I think. But those of us that are in it are chomping at the bit to get more predictive. And that's where the AI can start to look at this data and get us to predicting things such as escalations prior to them happening or deterioration long before it happens with a few key indicators, will dramatically change the way we look at all care, right? So I think AI is going to be a huge piece of it. At Virtual, we're piloting AI right now to look at predicting the level of care you should be in, whether you should be in observation or whether you should be admitted, as well as looking at whether you're a good candidate as you come into the ED for hospital at home. So, we're starting to dabble in these areas, and I think it's going to help make us smarter and help us, just like technology is helping us scale our at-home initiatives. I think AI is going to help us scale synthesizing the data and really making it valuable and usable data to help us in our care.
Yeah, and although it took us 40 minutes to actually hit it head on, I think we talked a lot around it as it being the tool to enable so many of the things that we've talked about. And completely agree with the way that Michael outlined it. It's about taking all of the data points that are being collected now and turning it into meaningful results and tools to better support care.
Well done. And now, I mean, going into our 10th and final prediction for this conversation, the human touch behind technology will be more important than ever. And I think as we talk about care in the home or shifting just where care is delivered really in a broader sense, I think it's allowing people to kind of do the people things and be there for those that are either getting well or staying well or anywhere in between, and allowing us to kind of elevate that human connection more so than ever using technology. And I think this prediction is one that I hope remains a prediction going forward, because it's something that's so critical and so important, and it has to be kind of at the center of what we're doing, because obviously healthcare is one of the most human-oriented fields out there. So I'd love both of your thoughts on this as we talk about kind of all the technology and tools that are enabling us to do exactly what we're talking about in terms of shifting care out of the walls of the traditional hospital setting.
I think that's the critical word, is the enablement. I think tech's an enabler in this space. It's not a substitute in this space. And so enabling the human element to deliver care is what all these technological advancements hold the promise of doing. And I think that's just going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, I agree. I think though, one of my surprise takeaways from doing some of this virtual care is that healthcare can be a very hectic and busy environment. And a lot of times with this virtual care, it enables an uninterrupted interaction with a patient. And our physicians have told us, wow, I would have never got to spend that half hour really digging into the patient on a traditional med-surg floor. So it's like this really interesting dynamic. I think a lot of people think the technology is going to make the care sterile. And I certainly was concerned about that it would feel sterile to the patient, to their family. And we're not finding that. And I think then, in conjunction with that, I think to Stephen's point, that it does at times enable us then in the human touch aspect to spend more time as well, face to face and in person. And the human touch is still a majorly critical part of this.
In 45 minutes, we have just predicted all of these wonderful things. I hope I see you guys in 12 months and we were talking about how all of this got done and we're on to yes, exactly. That we were just, we were so good, and we should have also bought a lottery ticket. So let's jump into discussion, but actually we have a lot of questions in the chat. I'm going to start with one that kind of goes back to our first prediction. There's a lot of discussion around where we stand with the waiver. Would one of you guys mind leaning in on that one to kick off the Q&A? Where we stand with it, what are your thoughts on kind of the timeline ahead of us?
Sure. I mean, I don't think that the waiver will mark the either continuation or end of care in the home. I think it's just going to be a marker of whether we continue to deliver them as inpatient encounters in the way that we have under the waiver to date. What I've been hearing out of DC is that with the aggressive timeline that the Republicans have for reconciliation, that this will probably get addressed sooner rather than later, as they try to clear the docket of things that need to be acted upon so that they can then focus on reconciliation. So I'm very hopeful that we're not going to get down to the 11th hour as the waiver nears expiration, and that the same bipartisan support that we had early on for continuation of the waiver will extend going forward. Coming out of committee, there was unanimous support with a 5-year extension planned, and I hope to see that come back into the conversation when they pick it up in the new Congress.
Yeah, I can't really add much more to that. That's what we're hearing as well, and we're optimistic about this. But it does go back to some of our earlier points that care in the home doesn't stop if the waiver stops. Yeah. Not for us, at least, if you build out a true care at home platform.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to shift gears here. There are a lot of questions around the conversation we had with regards to operations. So bringing, things like food delivery to the home, managing other services that would be required to deliver acute level care in the home. How do you think about sort of pulling all of this together and sort of the coordination of the things that naturally happen in a facility, bringing that to the home?
Wow.
It's an easy one, Mike.
30 seconds, please.
In 30 seconds. Wow. That's the logistics part. Yeah. It's a dance and not always a pretty dance, but really we utilize our facilities, our facility pharmacies. We get food from our facilities. So, we've integrated kind of a blended mix of what our nurses bring into the homes to couriers, as well as we also use paramedics and EMTs to do setup and some vitals as well. So it's something that will be unique to your organization and how you're going to manage it and how your facilities are best laid out, I think. And it's something you kind of have to start doing to figure out the best ways to do it. We're constantly learning and evolving. We look nothing like we did on day one, and we probably look nothing like we did a month ago, just because it's a constant learning process and you have to constantly be evolving and thinking about how you do these things. We're trying to be uber conscious of like top of licensure and how we maximize our most expensive resources as you would in a bricks and mortar facility. But it is a challenge, and we're often asking folks to do things that they wouldn't traditionally do in a traditional med surg role in our bricks and mortar facilities. Stephen, are you seeing the same things?
Yeah, I think that one of the key things as this space evolves, and this goes back to the discussion around new entrants and new solutions.
Yeah.
This is extremely manual dance, as Michael said, to try to coordinate and choreograph. And so being able to build in tools that take that manual coordination and turn it into a point-click interface to streamline communication and coordination across all of the care that's being delivered in patients' homes, that's going to be something I think we start to see a lot more of going forward. And it's exactly what this space needs, because that can help minimize errors, help to streamline, and help to make things more protocolized and algorithmic in a way, instead of being the manual de novo creation of a new process every time you're trying to orchestrate the solution.
Great. I mean, we touched on regulatory, which is kind of feeding our ops and back and forth. And I think both of you talked about how it's the evolution of this is happening quicker than we can maybe keep up with, but it's fantastic to see. How about patient selection? How do you identify those that are appropriate for these programs? And kind of, there's another question around here around how that is sort of, are you looking at innovative models for that as well?
Yeah, what we're doing today is an evolution of what had been done previously. I mean, this started as a completely manual process of having clinicians go through charts and try to find the needle in the haystack of who could go home. And as we've broadened out our capabilities, we've also broadened out our tools to enable the broader identification of those patients, so that we've built our inclusion-exclusion criteria right into our EMR, so that we know with a red, yellow, green identifier, is this somebody who lives outside of our geography that we're not going to be able to support? Is this somebody who has a frequency of visit needs that maybe borders on an inability to support? You know, if it's a Q4 medication that needs to be delivered, then we're probably not going to be in the home pending our capacity. Those kinds of things. And I think that the next phase of that is going back to the AI discussion of how can we build on LLM and learn from those patients we have successfully cared for and have opted in to get care in this way, compared to those who have stayed within the brick and mortar, to better find those patients in a more predictive manner going forward that's smarter than just the hard and fast coded inclusion-exclusion criteria of a decision tree, which was better than the subjective process of a clinician going through and trying to identify those patients before that. And I think doing that going forward also affords more opportunity for us to account for inequities in subjective processes, and applying more of just an equitable application of the ability for patients to benefit from this care model.
Yeah, and we have a very similar journey. I mean, it was the most manual process you could ever imagine to start. And it was a very expensive process to have a screen the way we did. We evolved into a list that was broken out and only presented us those patients that met certain inclusion criteria, and we excluded other patients. And now we've evolved in our testing and AI model to kind of help us with, because there's still an element of chart review that has to be done to really go, is this really truly somebody or not? And now we're dabbling with AI to kind of help us with that chart review part. If you had asked me earlier, when we were starting our program, I would have said logistics was probably the most difficult part because we're not good at logistics. I would say this arguably has become one of the bigger challenges. Again, harkening back to, if we can get clinicians to preemptively say, this is a good patient, this is a good patient, this is a good patient, like we kind of expedite all those processes, because the screening part is just the very beginning of that care journey, as we know. And the sooner we can start that care journey, the better it is for the organization and the better it is for the patient.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, it's again a learning process. The feedback loops have to be in place where patients that were appropriate, and then maybe lessons learned from getting a person home that maybe we start to think differently about who's appropriate for what level or what, I shouldn't say level, but more setting.
Yep.
We have a couple of questions here around success measures, and I know both of you called out a few of those, but do you have any idea of like new ones that you're testing? And there's also a question here, if you're not capacity constrained, is there an ROI for considering a hospital at home program?
Yeah, so we're launching with NCR a way for us to get patient feedback in a more systematic way that really compares with HCAHPS and that assesses patients in a routine way regarding their experience. I think that's a key component of this as we think about putting patients back at the center of care instead of our facilities. So yeah, we could focus on all the quality measures still, and we will always continue to. But I think really capturing the patient experience and the caregiver experience is important with all of this going forward. I think that's also wherein lies the ROI, if you're not capacity constrained, is that this has been proven to be a better care model in many ways for patients, with fewer adverse events and lower rates of readmission. And so being able to get patients to this care model is going to result in better care for them. And ultimately, what we've seen is a better experience for them as well. And so I think being able to measure those things is critical going forward.
Yeah, I would agree. And from an ROI perspective, I would also look at, capital requests and building new facilities. We have 2 new major capital projects. We've removed 20 beds from those projects. If anybody knows what a bed costs to build today, it's in the neighborhood of between $2 and $3 million to build a bed. So that's been supportive. I think the patient satisfaction is a huge piece. The reduced risk of readmissions that you may or may not get reimbursed for is also another big piece. And ultimately, utilizing your facilities for the sickest patients, and can you reduce facility costs if you're not at capacity? What would it take for you to reduce some of those facility costs? Because we're in a very lucky environment. I don't suspect it's going to sustain that we're at pay parity right now for our hospital at home, and that's a huge equation to say, hey, I'm going to get paid the same if they go home, whether they're in a bricks and mortar facility. I can greatly reduce costs by doing so.
These are both of your comments there. It's like dropping the mic and leaving on a high note. Better experience, better outcomes, lower costs. I thank you for all of your wonderful insights and sharing your experiences today. We joked that we'll be back here next year, but I do hope we are, and I hope we do see even more movement than we have in these last couple of years, and continue to share learnings and lift us all going, upward in getting the care in the most appropriate place for our patients, and continuing to drive better outcomes for those that we serve. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining. I'm going to hand it back over to Riley. And yeah, hope to see you here again in a year.
Great. Well, thanks again, Dr. Condit. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Dr. Dorner, Dr. Condit, and Michael for an excellent presentation, and thank Best Buy Health for sponsoring today's webinar. To learn more about the content presented today, please check out the resources section on your webinar console and fill out the post-webinar survey. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.